As we entered the study on today in Ruth chapter 3, we were able to see with more detail how God, in his amazing love for his people, he runs ahead of us, y'all, and he already knows what we're going to face. So he puts connections in our path that we will come to, where we will have these collisions with connections that are crafted for what we are facing in our lives. So, with the specifics of this crafting, like we understand that have a Naomi and a Ruth who are hungry and they come in contact with a connection that literally owns a field. Like God is detailed in how he crafts it. He does not say that Boaz was the herder of sheep. Naomi is not looking for wool. He doesn't say that Boaz is a crafting shoes. Naomi is not looking for shoes. The very thing that Naomi needs is the thing that God allows her connection that he has already set up to be in her path to have. Receive that today. God can craft connections to be in your path that are able to meet your specific need. It's from Ruth chapter 3, right about verse number 14. Naomi has already given Ruth some advice when this scene unfolds, and she has commanded Ruth to do certain things, one of them being to go and lay at the feet of Boaz. And so when Boaz wakes up, Boaz is startled, but he listens to Ruth, and Ruth tells him how she's his next of kin, and she wants him to go ahead and marry her. Boaz responds by saying, "In fact, indeed, I am not your next of kin. There is a person who has access to you. He's first up in line. He's riding shotgun. But if he does not want to do it, I will accept the responsibility," right? And so he then says to Ruth, "Now go ahead, daughter, and take your rest. Go ahead, lay down. Let's get your rest." So that's what they do. Fast forward, right? They go to sleep, wake up. And Boaz is the one who initiates this idea that says, let me cover you, let me protect you, let me make sure that it is not known that you have been in this place. So, one of the elements of crafted connections that I want you to receive for your life is that God in our path is already orchestrating connections that know how to cover us. Connections that will cover us, that will be safe places, that will be spaces where we can be vulnerable and we can be transparent. Now, why is that important for this time? Because we are believing, God, that when we come out of this, like this moment where we are sheltered again in place, we are going to have access to the newness that God has for our lives. And there will be moments when the type of people that he's bringing us in connection with, the opportunities that he's bringing us into connection with, the resources that he's bringing us into connection with, the ideas and dreams that he allows to overflow and begin to manifest, we will find ourselves feeling like, man, I have never experienced this before. I have never seen this before. I'm not an expert at this. I feel lost. I feel confused. And we are going to need safe spaces where we can be transparent and people are willing to cover us. They are willing to help us. It is going to be safe spaces for us to lend ourselves to learning and growing and being stretched and having access to things that kind of for real cause us to have to say, God, like, what am I doing in this place? But we want those moments and we receive those connections. So, as a part of your crafted connections, God is going to send us connections that will cover us. Just a verse or so after that, Boaz then says to Ruth, "Now, as you are preparing to go, take these 6 sheaves of barley, take it for you and for your mother-in-law." See, Boaz gets it. Boaz gets that Ruth comes and she sleeps at his feet. That probably wasn't the most comfortable position. And then Ruth has to go back to her mother-in-law. They aren't driving cars and they aren't Ubering, so she has a walk's journey really early in the morning. And then she has to prepare to come back to the field so that she can glean some food for she and for her mother-in-law. And so Boaz though relieves her of the pressure of all of that and says, "Here, take this for you and for your mother-in-law." Number 2, connections that consider you. Connections that just get the depth of your circumstance and of your situation, and they make room for you. They consider consider you. And so, what does that actually look like for us? What does it actually look like? It's like somebody really getting perhaps that's a single mom who's trying. That's a new entrepreneur who has big dreams and big ideas and just needs a little bit of guidance. That's a married wife who's struggling perhaps with her marriage, or who's happily married but just could use a tidbit of wisdom. That's someone who's having a transition with their teenage child or adult child. And I've already gone through those stages. And so I'm going to help them. It's people who really can consider you, who can process who you are and process what you're going through. And you don't have to spend a whole lot of effort striving and working and hoping to be understood and trying to do the most to have an opportunity. It's somebody who has perhaps walked in your shoes and they get it and they are intentional about making a way for you, or it's somebody who has never had to walk in your shoes and thus they are grateful and they are intentional about making a way for you. Ruth makes it home to Naomi. She articulates the things that Boaz spoke to her. But at the end of it, in about 3 and 18, she says, and that man will not rest until he concludes what he has said this day. Number three, connections that conclude what they have said. Boaz honors his word. Boaz actually goes. He meets with the other gentleman that he had mentioned to Ruth. He does the negotiation about that whole, do you want her? If you do, you need to buy the field. You need to marry Ruth. He comes to an understanding about that. He gets witnesses to that. And by the time Boaz comes back to Ruth, he has concluded the thing. Boaz is then able to fulfill his role as a husband, his role as a provider. He honors his word. He handles the entire scenario with integrity, both with Ruth and with the other gentleman. He brings it to a full closure. How does that apply to us? Well, if you're like me, there have been moments in your life when perhaps you have experienced people who were supposed to operate in a certain type of role or position, not necessarily fulfilling the thing that they were supposed to do in our lives. For some people, that was a father who was not very fatherly, or an absentee father who was like completely not on the scene at all. For others, that's a poor relationship, perhaps with a mom or with a sibling who was supposed to be close, not in competition, or with a best friend that was supposed to come through, or with a colleague who was supposed to be working with you, not against you, or an employer who was supposed to promote you in whatever capacity that looks like, a pastor or a preacher who disappointed, a church member who didn't come through, like in whatever capacity that looks like, for whatever variance we have in life, there are people for whom someone with really operating in their place and doing the things that they were supposed to do, that fell short. But in our next stage, God is going to give us connections that conclude. Crafted connections. God did that for his daughters. God does that for his children. As an added element to that, if we really think about it, years before, God ran ahead and he put Boaz in the womb of a prostitute. Rahab is his mom. And so, as he has these different interactions, perhaps his ability to cover Ruth at such a level was because he knew what it was like through the lens of his mom to have her secrets exposed, to have her vulnerabilities and her transparency used and mocked by people. Yeah, because his mama was a prostitute. So he knew what it was like for her to walk the shoes of being uncovered. His mom, in number two, was a woman who had to hustle, who had to strive, who had to work hard to supply and make her way. And so on number two, a connection that considers, maybe with that backdrop in mind, it was easier for him to say, Ruth is not going to have to do this. I've heard the stories of my mama. I've heard the stories of a woman who had to do whatever. And that's not going to happen on my watch. And the number three, when it comes to connections that conclude, if we remember the very fact that Boaz was alive and born to his mom Rahab was because when the spies came after she saved them, they said to her, when we come back to take over this area, we're going to protect you and your family line. And they honored their word. So Boaz was even in existence because there was a person who honored their word, who concluded what they said they would do for his mom. I know that God crafts connections that will meet our specific needs. And that is my prayer for you. As always, I honor the greatness in you. You can subscribe and share